Hey everybody, how's it going? It's the Daily Shooter, and today we're going to talk about two very common scope reticles. We're not going to talk about first focal plane, second focal plane, which one's better, or any other attribute of a scope, only the reticle today. What we're going to be talking about is the bullet drop compensating reticle, or the BDC reticle, and the mil-dot reticle. A lot of people still wonder which one is right for them, which particular one is going to suit their needs and their specific application best. And so they kind of sit there and they go between the two. Some people don't quite understand the mil-dot reticle, so we're going to go over those real quick today. Okay, so I went ahead and printed out the reticles so that you could see them side by side, and hopefully that way you get a better understanding as to how they compare to each other. Now, this particular scope right here has a mil-dot reticle, and you can see this is a mil-dot reticle next to it, or a representation of a mil-dot reticle. This vortex right here has a bullet drop compensating reticle, and for the most part, this is what a bullet drop compensating reticle looks like. Now remember, each company may have a different looking reticle. This is a general representation of what each reticle will look like. Some companies also have caliber specific reticles, so you may have a caliber specific bullet drop compensating reticle for maybe a 308 or a 223, and that's something to consider as well. Just remember, these are general representations of what each looks like. Okay, so let's start with the bullet drop compensating reticle, and the reason I'm starting with this is for the sheer fact that this is probably the most popular and widely used reticle out of the two, and that's because it's the easiest to use. Now remember, the bullet drop compensating reticle requires that you know your range, so I recommend a reticle like this to anybody that has another way to range a target, like a laser rangefinder, or you're somebody that just plans on shooting out at a range that already has predetermined distances. So if you're at a range and it already has marked targets at 100, 200, 400, 600 yards, whatever the case might be, and that's where you shoot primarily, then I would suggest a bullet drop compensating reticle, because you don't have to worry about finding your range. You can either range it with a laser rangefinder, or it's already set up for you, to which case you can make easier calculations. Now, bullet drop compensating reticle, like I said, works with different calibers, and it determines where your hold is. Okay, so this shows you how far the bullet's going to drop at a specific range. So some scopes that have bullet drop compensating reticles might tell you to zero it in at 100 or 200 yards. Each mark then would subsequently be 100 or 200 yards drop from that particular distance. So if you have it zeroed at, let's say, 100 yards, this first mark right here might be where you want to hold at 200 yards, and then 300 yards, and 400 yards, and so on, so that you know exactly where your hold is. Basically, the center of your reticle becomes this dot right here. You know where your hold is, and you can make a ranged shot using these compensated drop points. Now, if it has you at 200 yards and you have to zero 200 yards to be zeroed, in that case, each mark may be 2 to 4 to 6 to 8 to 1,000 yards out. Every increase could be 200 yards if they're requiring you at a 200 yard zero, and so on. So each particular scope may have a different way to compensate for that particular bullet drop, but it's very simple, and it just revolves around where your hold is going to be. Other scopes may also have windage on each side, so you may see hash marks for windage, and each windage mark may have another dot for the hold for that particular compensation. So you may have a third hash mark for your windage. So if you have a lot of wind, you may want to hold out here, and then you know you're going to be shooting at 400 yards, so you'll just bring it back down here to the compensating for the drop, and then you'll make your shot. Okay, so it compensates for wind, it compensates for elevation, it compensates for drop at a specific yard distance. Now, this is very simple. I may be overcomplicating things, but for the most part, if you know your range or have a way to range things, this is the way you want to go. Bullet drop compensating reticles, very easy to use. Okay, so now let's take a look at the mil-dot reticle, also known as a range estimating reticle. This is a great reticle that I recommend to anybody that doesn't know the distance to their target and doesn't have a way to find out the distance to their target via a laser rangefinder or predetermined distance at a range. This reticle right here will help you find the range to your target. The only reason I think it's a little bit less popular than this particular reticle is because this does require you to make some calculations. When you get a scope, it will also give you a card, usually does give you a card, that tells you what calculations to make in order to determine the range to your target. And it also requires that you know the approximate size of your target. Now, I am going to keep this brief just so I can give you an overview, and this video doesn't run too long, and you can kind of make your choice between which one you want to get. But let's say this. Let's say that the scope tells you that a 6-foot man in your reticle, if you're looking through them at full magnification, a 6-foot man that takes up 4 of these dots is determined to be 100 yards. So you know that you're looking at your target, and you you at least have an understanding that your target is probably around 6 feet tall. You can then look through and say, okay, he does take up 4 of these dots. He's approximately 100 yards away. Now the problem with this is if you make a mistake and your 6-foot man is only 4 feet tall and he still takes up 4 of those dots, now your shot's going to be a little bit off because you didn't know the exact size of your target. Now a lot of the cards that you get with this will actually tell you in inches. So 12 inches, 24 inches, 36 up to maybe 72 inches is the size of your target. Per mil dot is going to be your estimated range. Now it does get a little bit more complicated than that, but for the most part, as a basic example, the size of your target and how many dots it takes up in your reticle will help you calculate the range to that particular target. So remember, this requires you to know a couple things: the size of your target, how many dots it takes up, and then you'll have to make the adjustments on your scope or know your previous holdover. This is when dope comes into play. Basically, you want to know where your holdover is if it determines that this comes out to be 400 yards. So let's say you're using this reticle and you determine that your target only takes up one of these dots right here. He's 6 feet tall, takes up 1 dot, and that's determined to be 400 yards. You have to know that if you're sighted in on your scope at 100 yards, you then need to make your calculations, adjustments on your turrets, or know what your 400-yard holdover is for that particular cartridge in order to make the proper shot, because it's not bullet drop compensating. Now, in this scope, I've actually determined where these particular dots are gonna land for me. So I've almost turned this into a bullet drop compensating scope, or reticle, excuse me, because I have previous shots that I've written down, so I can tell you at 100 yards, if I hold at 200 yards, it's going to be between the first and second dot. So I can make that hold at 200 yards and still make my shot even after I've made my calculation. And I can still use these for windage as well. After you take some shots, you'll figure it out. But remember, this one requires some calculations and requires you to know the size of your target. This one requires you to know how far your target is away. So they're two completely different reticles. Again, I recommend this one to anybody who's going to be shooting that knows how far away your target is. You know the range to your target, or at least you have a way to estimate that range. And I recommend this particular reticle to somebody who has no way to estimate the range to their target. If you're a hunter and it really matters to you to make that first shot exactly where you want it to be, you're looking at this big buck and you know about the right size of that buck, you can make those calculations for a perfect first shot using a mil dot reticle. If you know that he's at a feed bucket and you've already ranged that feed bucket at 200 yards, you don't need this type of reticle. This one's going to be perfect for you. So remember, when you're making a choice as to which reticle is the one that you want to buy, this one can be compensating. You can use this as a compensating reticle. After you go and you test it, you use it, you learn it a little bit. This one right here is already predetermined, so it's really easy to use. It depends on your skill level, on how much you want to put into your shooting, on how much you want to practice, and how much you want to master the art of shooting through a scope. Remember that first and second focal planes, those are different topics, and those will actually affect these particular reticles, so something to keep in mind. But anyway, guys, bullet drop compensating reticle, mil dot reticle, range reticle, range estimating reticle. I hope this helped kind of clear it up for some of you out there that are determining which one you want to buy, because no matter what scope you pick, the reticle makes a big difference. So thank you all very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and have a great day.